I'm introducing Steve Wood, who is the CEO of NFTY Token. Hello, Steve. Thank you for joining us today. How are you doing?
Doing good, Zach. Thanks. I'm actually the COO.
COO, my bad. I see you like the CEO, so like I hope I haven't discredited your CEO. But yeah.
Well, I'll tell our CEO that he's got some competition.
Good stuff, man. Can you tell everyone like how you got involved with NFTs? Because I know it's an interesting story.
Yeah, so I've got a pretty long, like winding path to NFTs. My original career start was in politics. So I got my master's degree and I moved to DC, and because that was the only place to be if you had a master's degree in political science. And I was working in something completely unrelated, and I was playing this obscure sport called underwater hockey that most people have never heard of and raises a lot of eyebrows when I talk about it. One of my teammates on the underwater hockey team worked for the FBI, and he was investigating the Silk Road, and this was in 2011. And he told me that I should look into this technology that they're using to facilitate the payments called Bitcoin. I looked into it, thought it was kind of cool, but didn't touch it because it was the black market drugs and murder currency. So I kept an eye on it for a while, and eventually he talked me into buying some. So I picked up some. He's like, you're not going to go to jail if you just pick up some Bitcoin. So I picked up some Bitcoin. And from that point on, I just kind of sat on it, didn't really know what to do with it, just watched. And I followed the entire industry for several years at that point and watched all the peaks and the valleys, watched all the developments come up, and always felt like at some point I was going to end up working in this field because a lot of my friends had started getting into it. I started meeting a lot of people because at that point I'd started moving into technology out of politics. At some point you get sick of working in DC politics if you have a soul. So I left and started moving into technology and meeting a lot more tech-oriented people. And they were all starting to get into blockchain as well. So I figured that I've been watching this for a while and I've been following the industry. I've got a lot of technical knowledge because before I started doing politics, I was a nerd. Like I started coding websites at age 11, and it just kind of moved into politics because I got swept up in it when I was picking my major. And eventually around 2018, I started hearing about NFTs, and it was in the context of real estate where I started hearing that you could, at some point, probably you could do it at that point, but no one had done it yet. You could buy or sell your home and own the ownership right through a token. And I was really intrigued by this, trying to figure out how the heck could this possibly work, because of most of my background was like in fungible tokens. So I kept an eye on it, and I started at that point I started getting more directly into crypto. I started working with the blockchain country Liberland and started helping facilitate a lot of their back end stuff and their international humanitarian aid projects, which are all powered by crypto. And so eventually I started getting more and more into blockchain, and I was working on my own startup at that point. And COVID killed that startup. It's unfortunate. Some people did really well during COVID. We did not. All our funding dried up. All our clients went out of business, and it was just horrible. So I pivoted and started moving towards the crypto industry because I always felt like I was going to end up there anyway. And it just worked out. Like I reached out to a couple people who were in the space, asking what was going on, if they could, facilitate any connections. And then like less than a month later, boom, I'm like working on 3 different NFT startups. And the one that I'm here mostly talking about right now is NFTY. But I got a couple other ones that are kind of sitting on the back burner. I'm really focused on this one right now because it needs a lot of attention and it's got a lot of potential.
And can you just go into a little bit more detail in terms of what it is exactly that you guys are trying to achieve with NFTY?
Yeah, so one of the big problems we've found with NFTs, especially with the current utilization, which is what I consider to be the low-hanging fruit of NFTs, art transactions, art sales, PDFs, or GIFs, JPEGs, blah, blah, blah. But there's a lot of really scammy and low quality content. And it's, you see all the people on like Twitter and stuff talking about how NFTs are cringe and how, it's a stupid scam fad because you can just copy paste. Obviously, we know that that's not going to be the final use case, but for the low end, like low hanging fruit, yeah, like you can see where they're coming from. And that results in a lot of scams because people will just go on like Google image search, copy a picture that's really cool, digitize it a little bit, and then throw it up on OpenSea for like 10 ETH or something. And a lot of times those crowd out the really high quality stuff that people put a lot of energy, a lot of time, and a lot of talent into. So what we're trying to do here, and I think we're going to be pretty successful, it's been doing pretty good so far, is we're building a system that sort of replicates the reputation layers that you see both on traditional social media and in the real world when it comes to buying and selling art. So in the real world, when you buy and sell art, you've got like curators, you've got people who know the artists who are like vouching for them, you know, people who are art experts that can look at this and see, yes, this is good, people who look at it and say this is bad. Yeah, a lot of that's subjective. But one really important factor there is you can't just determine that through pure algorithmic factors. You have to have some sort of human input. Art and any sort of creative work is inherently subjective. It's inherently something that requires a human to make a value judgment at some point. And there's no way to do that with the current way that NFTs are being sold. So the good stuff doesn't really filter up to the top. It may, but that's oftentimes just luck of the draw or the fact that the artist is already really popular for some other reason. So what NFTY does, it's obviously a utility token. You buy it and stake it. And then by staking it, you get the power to vote on NFTs, similar to how you would vote on like Reddit with an upvote or a like on social media or retweet, you know, stuff that, well, now we're going into the algorithmic stuff. Stuff that when Facebook's determining what you see, they take into account all of the various interactions it's gotten and push it up to the top of your newsfeed. It's similar. It's not exactly like that, obviously, but we leverage multiple smart contracts to identify what all the engagement is with these. And we integrate with NFT exchanges to filter the stuff that people really like up to the top. And we're also creating jobs with this because this could be a full-time job for someone. You actually get paid to do this. Everything in blockchain and involves token transfers, right? And those tokens have value. So when you upvote an NFT that sells, the more you have upvoted it. So like if I have 1,000 NFTY tokens and I allocate 100, you have 1,000 NFT tokens and you allocate 200, it sells. Then you get 2/3 of the cut of the advocate cut, and I get 1/3 of that cut. And that percentage is 7.5% of the NFT sale. So if you've got $1 million NFT that sells, you're splitting $75,000. You know, that's not chump change, or yeah, it's pretty substantial. So you can make a pretty decent living doing this if you really want to. And we're trying to make sure that we can bring quality into the space to make sure that we're not getting crowded out so that people that are like naysayers and people who just think that this is a fad, it's going to go away, like people said about every technological development, and they've all been wrong, but we're working to prove them wrong and make people money in the process.
Fantastic, man. I mean, you've just given out a wealth of information, and I've seen a bunch of questions have come for you.
I do that.
yeah, in the YouTube chat, right? So if you've got a moment in between now and the end of the session, just jump onto YouTube because there's a bunch of questions for you to answer, right?
All right, I'll try and check that.
There was one that David James basically answered for you by James Burdick, which I just thought was great. And he said, hey, Steve, can we consolidate our debt as a student into a non-fungible token, right? So
I don't see why not. That's actually one of the other projects I'm working on involves NFT lending, but that's a story for another day.
Story for another day. That's super interesting, man. Steve, really appreciate you coming on board, and I will speak to you soon, man. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Thank you.